Now there's tons of individual battles in the Pacific, too many to cover every single basis for. So don't even worry about writing it down unless I tell you, unless you want to. I'm not going to go in depth into every single one of these. As I said, we're going to have to go from island to island to get to these different areas. So one of the early ones, Singapore surrenders in 1942. That's one of the early American successes. Really, we have several failures before we're successful. A huge failure is when we lose the Philippines. So write this one down. We lose the Philippines. Japan invades an American base inside of the Philippines, and they're going to take over that entire island and the archipelagos around that area. When they come in, they take over a couple different cities, and they take over the entire island, and American troops are going to flee. The man who's in charge, you can write it down now, because you're going to have to write it down later, is General MacArthur. And MacArthur is going to flee in the middle of the night. The Japanese are beginning to attack at one end of the island, and they're going to take this high-ranking general, they're going to take him on a speedboat in the middle of the night, evacuate him from where he was sleeping, run him out to a large U.S. battleship, and then keep him from getting captured. However, we're going to leave behind like 30,000 soldiers on the islands of the Philippines that are going to be captured. That's going to result in one of the worst forced marches that America has ever experienced. It's not only America, there's also British and Australian POWs who are in this time period. If you don't know what a POW stands for, write it down. It stands for Prisoner of War. Okay? So this results in an event called the Bataan Death March. The Bataan Death March is on your timeline. It's April 1942. All the prisoners who are left when MacArthur leaves the Philippines and when the Japanese take the Philippines over are going to be forced to march 60 miles. So a lot of us haven't even walked maybe 10 or 20 miles consecutively, let alone 60 miles in the blazing heat, to different concentration camps. These are types of POW camps, working camps inside of the Philippines. They aren't extermination camps. However, on the way, on the march, they're not going to be provided water. The Japanese are going to do things like make them rest in the sun, if they even give them rest. Now this doesn't sound too bad, but to some of you people like me who are lighter complected, when you're sitting in the sun in the blazing heat, after walking 15, 20 miles without any water, you're going to turn as red as a lobster and you're not going to be able to function very well. That's just not going to be an easy way for you to go. Several people who fall behind or suffer from dehydration and maybe stumble as they walk are going to be butt-ended with rifles. And they're going to be beaten and kicked until they either are killed or until they get back up and fall back in line for the march. So this is 76,000 prisoners. It's only 12,000 Americans, but a significant Allied force is forced on this march. The Americans will not forget this. We will remember this forced march. We will remember this for the treatment of the Japanese and what they're doing to us. This is one of the more famous pictures from World War II and the time period when the Bataan Death March happened. So you can see the agony and the anguish in some of the soldiers' eyes, particularly the one kind of in the middle of the picture. At the end of the war, when we take back the Philippines, we're going to liberate or free some of these POW camps, and we end up running into a lot of soldiers who look like that man right there. So he looks in many ways like a Holocaust survivor. But this isn't Germany, this isn't the Nazis, this is the Japanese and a POW camp that was supposed to be operated according to codes of war. Burma is another important campaign. We won't go into detail, but in order to isolate the Japanese, we've got to cut off their supply routes. There was a variety of supply routes going near India and going near Vietnam and Cambodia, and we're going to have to cut those off. And the Burma Road was one of those significant routes going into Japan and China. Another term at the top of this slide is called island hopping. You will have to know what island hopping is. Yeah, island hopping, in short, to give you a definition, is the American strategy in the Pacific. It's exactly what it says it is. One thing that America understood was that the Japanese were ferocious fighters. They were trained to fight to the last man, to fight to the death, without dishonoring their country by surrendering or by killing themselves. So every single island we took, we knew we were going to have to fight every single Japanese soldier to the death on. So consequently, that's going to be a huge cost in human lives inside of these different islands. So the strategy these generals come up with is to hop from island to island to island, only taking islands of importance, asking themselves the question, hey, do we really need that spot? Can we skip that one and go to this one? And they looked for things, like I said earlier, they looked for airfield. Is there an airstrip where our B-29s can land? Is there fuel? Is there gas? Is there oil? Is there different stores the Japanese have created different things for? Is there a reason the Japanese want this particular island? If we take over this one, will it make or weaken our enemy in a way that doesn't allow them to fight the war? It starts at Hawaii, it comes through the Marshalls, it moves over to some major battles inside of Guam, Leyte Gulf, Okinawa, Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal. Several of those are some of the more famous, ferocious battles. The closer we got to Japan, the bigger the battles became. Many of these islands are volcanic rock, meaning they're part of the Ring of Fire you may have learned about. There's volcanoes that come up from the ocean. They had a lot of tropical vegetation on them, but by the time America left these islands, they'd been bombarded by artillery blast after blast after blast that really left nothing alive on these islands. This is the shot of some soldiers fighting on Kerguelen Island. And really, as you can see, there's really just going to be a spot inside of the ocean by the time that they leave. There's not going to be really anything left there except maybe that airstrip that they needed or the soldiers who were there considered to be holding it. When you look at this last map, you see the farthest extent of Japanese conquest. Meaning, this is how big the Japanese created their empire. Anything inside of the green line is considered to be occupied by Japan. Okay? So those islands would have been considered controlled Japanese territory. You can see it going into China, you can see it into Korea near the mainland continent of Asia, all the way out to the islands of the Pacific. So when you look at the Axis powers, they controlled a huge amount of not only Europe, but they also controlled a huge amount of the Pacific as well. Following Pearl Harbor, America is outraged. We can't believe that we were attacked, surprisingly, without a declaration of war, with no warning at all, with the cost of around 1,000 some soldiers during the time period, during the actual attack itself. We want revenge. We want to go back at them, and we want to hit them where it hurts. But remember what I said, we can't take off from Hawaii and attack the mainland of Japan. We can't attack the island itself. So, this is Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle. Doolittle was a very famous pilot. He's an air show pilot. He's a guy who flies planes for a living. He'd be very considerable to Charles Lindbergh of an earlier era. He's a stunt pilot. He also does a lot of test planes, like he flies planes to see if they're going to work, experimental type aircraft that if they don't work, you have to jump out of and land safely on the ground. So he kind of is well known throughout America. He's kind of a celebrity of the time period. He's going to lead a group of American soldiers to strike back at America. It's going to be called the Doolittle Raid. Write that down, please. The Doolittle Raid is our first attack of revenge. So there's a lot of hurdles to overcome here. First off, airplanes weren't commonly taking off from aircraft carriers at the time period. So one of the first things that had to happen for us to get back to Japan was they had to build an aircraft carrier. They take a large oil tanker, they put a flat deck on top of it, and they start flying planes off of it. Doolittle has to sell this to the Army. He keeps telling them air warfare is the way of the future, and you need to buy into it, otherwise it's not going to be successful. Finally, following World War II, they realized the potential of aircraft and the things that Jimmy Doolittle was doing. So they create this aircraft carrier. He goes and recruits special pilots that he believes can be successful in conducting such a raid on Japan, and who are going to be committed to the objectives of getting revenge back against the Japanese. This group of men are going to set out towards Japan on a voyage that's going to take several days to a week to get even within striking distance of Japan. The plan for them is to take off from this aircraft carrier, fly over Japan and fly over Tokyo, drop a payload of bombs over them. But since they're going to be so far from their battleship, they aren't going to have enough fuel to return to that battleship. So after they drop their bombs, they're going to continue flying towards China. They're going to fly over the Yellow Sea, they're going to fly into China. They're going to either crash land their planes, or they're going to abandon their planes, jump out of them, and land somewhere on the ground inside of China. Now, if you heard what I just said, you're thinking, well, how the heck are you going to do that? It's a suicide mission. It's a mission that you can't necessarily be successful at. These soldiers are going to have to accept the fact that they aren't going to make it home. There's no turning around and flying a plane that way to go back to your aircraft carrier, to go back to America. You're going to either be captured or you're going to spend a significant time living in a bush in China, hiding from the Japanese. Nonetheless, he found the right people to do this. They believed in Jimmy Doolittle, they believed in his skill. So as they got closer to Japan and they got closer to the actual country itself, they got within range, but not as close as they wanted to. It's in the middle of the night. They're spotted by a Japanese scout ship that sees their ship heading towards them, but they see the scout ship too. So now they know they've been seen. They know that they have to make a decision. Do I go? Do we take off tonight? Do we attack Japan? Or do we abandon our plan? Do we go back towards America and try and do something again? So the soldiers are debating, and more so the generals and the commanders are debating, and they decide to go for it. They know that they have to go right then, because if they don't go right then, they're going to be discovered, and it's going to be, the plan's going to basically be a ride. So, a couple problems with the night that they're doing this. It's a stormy night on the ocean. There's huge swells in the ocean that go up and down, and the ship's really having trouble time staying steady for the aircraft that are going to have to take off. I already told you guys this is a new thing. Aircraft weren't very good at taking off from battle or from aircraft carriers during the time period, and they're propeller-propelled aircraft, so they're a lot slower. The aircraft they're using also are going to be loaded down with bombs, so they're extremely heavy. So some of the soldiers weren't even sure they would make it off the ship at all when they took off. So the decision's been made. The guy to go first is going to be Doolittle because he's the best pilot of them all, so he's going to take off first. So he starts at his end of the runway. They had to take the ship and they had to time it so that as it was going up and down in the ocean with the rocking of the waves inside of the ocean, the top of the ship is at the top of the wave when the plane reaches the end of the runway, okay? Because otherwise, if it's at the bottom of the wave, the plane's going to come off and go straight into the ocean and crash. So they had to work that out where it's timed to come off at that time period. He starts his engines at the end of the runway, turns them on high, the plane's booming, it's thundering down the side of the battleship or the aircraft carrier. He gets to the end, and soldiers say they kind of saw it hit the end of the runway. It's in the dark of the night in the storm. It kind of drops off the end of the battleship, but then catches air under the wings, doesn't hit any water, and takes up out into the air. You hear the soldiers on the deck are cheering. They're ecstatic. The mission is a go. They know that they're going to be on their way next. So one by one, very carefully, it takes them some time to do this. They take off the end of the battleship and they gather inside of the skies above them until the last airplane is up. They take off and they head towards Japan. Since they were discovered, they have less fuel than they thought. So now they aren't even going to make it inside of China. So the suicide mission has become even harder in this aspect because they can't land inside of China after they drop their bombs. They're successful in getting to the Japanese. They're successful in getting to Tokyo. They're successful in dropping their bombs. America is getting its revenge. The pilots are going to continue on into the South China Sea, and many of them are going to abandon ships. Some of the planes do make it into China. Doolittle will be found near the end of the war in a POW camp, and he does live through the end of the war. And this is a symbolic attack for America. The newspapers are going to read, just like it did with VE Day, Doolittle strikes back at Japan. Doolittle's raid on Japan proves Japan is not untouchable. And now Americans know we're coming for you. We've had our revenge from Pearl Harbor, and we're coming back for what you did to us.